The sky above was darker than usual, painted with heavy clouds that covered the stars. Lyra walked beside Darius in silence, her thoughts heavy, her heart unsettled. Days had passed since the ambush at the fortress ruins, yet the memory of that fight still lingered in her mind. She remembered how close she had come to losing him, how close he had come to falling under the blades of those mercenaries. The thought made her chest tighten painfully. She didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. He was no longer just a protector, he had become something far more important to her. Darius walked a few steps ahead, scanning the horizon as always, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. His body was tense, not from fear but from constant awareness. He had been trained to never lower his guard, but Lyra could see the weariness in his shoulders. He carried the weight of their journey, their battles, and her safety, yet he never complained. That night, when they stopped to rest, Darius found a sheltered spot near the ruins of an old tower. He built a small fire and offered her food before taking any for himself. Lyra accepted quietly, her eyes watching him in the flickering light. She wanted to tell him how much his kindness meant to her, but words failed. She had spent her whole life believing no one would ever stay, that no one would ever fight for her. Now here he was, proving her wrong with every action. When the fire had burned low, she finally found the courage to speak. "Darius," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence, "why don't you leave me? You've had so many chances to walk away and still you stay. Why?" He looked up from sharpening his blade, his eyes steady on hers. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly, he set the weapon aside and leaned closer to the fire. "Because you matter," he said simply. "Not because of who you were, not because of what powers you might have, but because you're a person who deserves more than what the world has given you. I won't abandon you, not now, not ever." Lyra's throat tightened. She had heard promises before, but they were always empty, spoken by people who betrayed her when it was convenient. Yet when Darius spoke, she believed him. His words weren't polished or poetic. They were plain, raw, and true, and that truth filled a hollow place inside her heart she hadn't even realized was still bleeding. The following morning, the world tested that promise. As they crossed into a valley filled with broken machines and twisted metal from old wars, the sound of engines roared behind them. Lyra's stomach dropped. More hunters had come. This time they weren't mercenaries. These were soldiers trained and armed with advanced weapons. Their leader, a tall man with cold eyes, pointed at Lyra. "That girl is ours. Step aside, human, and we'll let you live." Darius moved in front of her instantly, his stance wide, his weapon ready. "She belongs to no one," he said firmly, his voice like iron. The soldier sneered. "Then you'll die with her." The fight was unlike any before. Blasts of energy lit the valley, echoing against the metal wreckage. Darius fought like a man possessed, striking down one enemy after another, his body moving with sharp precision. But there were too many. For every soldier he cut down, two more appeared. Lyra's heart raced as she watched him struggle, blood already staining his arm from a fresh wound. Fear gripped her. The old fear that she was a burden, that because of her he would die. Her hands shook, her breath came fast, and she wanted to run, to hide. But then she remembered his words. "You matter. I won't abandon you." She clenched her fists and forced herself to stand. No longer would she cower while he fought for her. Deep inside she felt a spark, a power she had always suppressed, a strength she had feared to use. Now she let it rise. Her silver hair glowed faintly, her eyes burned with strange light, and energy crackled in her veins. With a cry, Lyra raised her hands, and a wave of energy burst forth. It struck the soldiers like a storm, sending them flying, tearing through their weapons. The battlefield went silent as the survivors scrambled back, fear on their faces. Darius turned to her, astonishment in his eyes, but also pride. Lyra trembled, the power leaving her body. But she stood tall. "I am not weak," she said, her voice clear and steady, "and I will not let anyone take me again." The soldiers retreated, unwilling to face her strength. When the last of them fled, Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhausted. Darius was at her side instantly, catching her before she could fall. His arms were strong and steady, his presence grounding her. "You saved us both," he murmured, brushing dirt from her face. "I knew you weren't broken." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from something new. Hope. For the first time she felt the weight of her past lifting, replaced by the warmth of a future she could barely imagine. As they rested under the shadow of the broken machines, Lyra leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You believed in me before I believed in myself," she whispered. "No one has ever done that." Darius didn't answer with words. He simply wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. In his silence, she found more comfort than she had ever known. Days later, when they finally reached the borders of safe land, Lyra looked back one last time at the wastelands where she had been abandoned, hunted, and broken. She no longer felt fear. She no longer felt powerless, because beside her stood the man who had never left, the one who had chosen to fight for her when everyone else turned away. The world would remember her as the alien girl who had been abandoned by her own people. But Lyra knew the truth. She had been found not by a conqueror or a master, but by a warrior with a kind heart, a man who saw her not as a slave or a burden, but as someone worth saving, someone worth standing beside. She turned to him, her voice steady but soft. "You gave me back my life, Darius. I'll never forget that." He met her gaze, his eyes calm, his expression unshakable. "You don't owe me anything. We walk forward together. That's enough." And so they did. Together, side by side, human and alien, bound not by chains or bargains, but by trust, loyalty, and a bond stronger than either had ever known. For the first time, Lyra felt free, not because she had escaped her captors, but because she had found someone who would never abandon her. Someone who had taught her that even in a world full of cruelty, kindness could still exist, and that kindness had saved her. The night after the canyon battle was heavy with silence. The air smelled of smoke and blood, and though the fire Darius built crackled warmly, Lyra could not shake the images of what had happened. She sat close to him, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the flames, but her thoughts were far away. Darius, despite his wound, moved with steady discipline. He tied a strip of cloth around his bleeding arm and checked his weapon again before finally sitting down to rest. Lyra had seen warriors before, many of them stronger, richer, and more feared than him. Yet none of them had fought for her the way this man did. She wanted to ask him why, but every time she opened her mouth, the words refused to leave. Instead, she found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the scars along his jaw, the faint lines of exhaustion under his eyes, and the way he never let his guard down even when his body was tired. He was different from anyone she had known, and that difference was slowly stirring something inside her that she didn't understand. The next morning, they continued their journey. The land grew harsher as they walked. The cracked soil gave way to jagged rocks and narrow paths between steep cliffs. Lyra stumbled more than once, but Darius was always there to catch her, his hand steady and warm against her arm. She tried to act indifferent, to pull away quickly each time, but the truth was she didn't hate his touch. She found comfort in it, though she would never admit that out loud. As the days passed, their unspoken bond grew stronger. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. When Lyra was thirsty, Darius handed her water before she asked. When she was tired, he slowed his pace without complaint. And when danger threatened in the distance, whether the sound of movement in the shadows or the distant growl of unseen creatures, he placed himself in front of her every time. But one evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs, Lyra's past returned to haunt her. They had stopped near an old structure half buried in the sand, the remains of a once great fortress. Lyra's eyes darkened as memories flooded back. She had been in places like this before, where chains and cruelty ruled her life. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the heat of the setting sun. Darius noticed. He set down his pack and studied her carefully. "This place bothers you," he said, his voice calm. She looked away, ashamed of her fear. "It reminds me of where I came from. The cages, the people who left me there." Her voice trembled. No one ever stayed. Not once. For a long time, Darius said nothing. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, his voice low and firm. "I am not them. I will not leave you." The certainty in his words shook her to her core. She wanted to believe him, but believing meant opening herself to pain, and pain was all she had ever known. She turned her face away, but in her chest her heart beat harder, whispering that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. That night, as they sat by the fire, Lyra couldn't stay silent any longer. "Why do you keep protecting me?" she demanded suddenly, her voice sharper than she intended. "You risk your life over and over. You fight enemies that could kill you. For what? I have nothing to give you. Nothing you could want. Darius didn't flinch at her words. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees, and looked at her directly. I don't need anything from you. Then why? She pressed, her voice breaking. He paused, searching for the right words. Because no one deserves to be abandoned. Not you, not anyone. I made a choice long ago that if I could save someone, I would, no matter who they were. Tears stung her eyes and she quickly turned her face away, not wanting him to see. But she couldn't stop the warmth spreading in her chest. His words wrapped around her like the cloak he had given her, both strange and comforting. For the first time, she began to wonder if she had been wrong all her life. Maybe not everyone was cruel. Maybe not everyone left. The following day tested that fragile hope. As they moved through the ruins of the fortress, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Lyra froze, her instincts screaming danger. Darius signaled for silence, his hand tightening on his weapon. Out of the shadows came a group of mercenaries, their armor marked with symbols of old war clans. Their eyes locked onto Lyra and she felt her blood run cold. There she is, one of them sneered. The alien slave who escaped. She's worth a fortune. Lyra's chest tightened. She knew these men. They were the kind who had once chained her, sold her, laughed at her suffering. Her knees felt weak, and for a terrifying moment, she thought Darius might hand her over to save himself. That was what anyone else would have done. But Darius stepped forward, his voice like thunder. She belongs to no one. The mercenaries laughed cruelly. Stand aside, human. This doesn't concern you. It does now, Darius replied, raising his weapon. The battle that followed was brutal. The mercenaries were trained fighters, and there were many of them. Darius fought with skill and fury, his blade flashing, his gun roaring in the night. Lyra crouched behind a wall, watching the fight with her heart in her throat. She wanted to help, but her body trembled with fear. Old memories chaining her down. She felt useless, powerless, the same way she always had. But then she saw him fall. One of the mercenaries struck Darius hard, knocking him to the ground. His weapon slipped from his grasp, and for a moment he lay still. The mercenaries closed in, their laughter echoing in the ruins. Something snapped inside Lyra. She could not let this man, the only one who had ever stood for her, die because of her weakness. With a cry, she grabbed a broken piece of metal from the ground and charged forward. Her body was weak, but her spirit burned like fire. She struck one of the mercenaries, surprising him, and in that instant Darius rose again, seizing his weapon. Together they fought, human and alien side by side. Lyra was clumsy, but her determination gave Darius the edge he needed. Blow by blow, the mercenaries fell until the ruins were silent once more. When it was over, Lyra collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving, the broken weapon slipping from her hands. Darius approached her, his face pale with exhaustion, but his eyes shone with pride. He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You fought, he said softly. You didn't give up. Tears streamed down her face, but this time she didn't hide them. She looked at him, her voice trembling. I thought I couldn't, I thought I was nothing. But you? She choked back a sob. You made me believe I could. For a moment there was only silence between them. The fire of battle still smoldered in the ruins, but around them, the world felt strangely calm. Lyra met his gaze, and for the first time in her life, she felt something she had never dared to feel before. Hope. That night, as they rested again by a small fire, Lyra didn't sit apart from him. She moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. For so long she had been alone, unwanted, abandoned by everyone. But now, sitting beside this man, she felt something different. She felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. Thank you for not leaving me. Darius looked at her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he simply nodded as if to say he would never leave, no matter what came next. And in her heart, Lyra believed him. The next morning began with silence, broken only by the whistling wind that swept across the empty wasteland. The sun rose slowly over the cracked horizon, painting the ground in gold and gray. Lyra opened her eyes, the warmth of the cloak still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. For a moment she forgot where she was. She almost thought she had dreamed the soldier beside her. But when she turned, she saw him sitting nearby, already awake, sharpening his blade with careful precision. His armor gleamed faintly under the early light, scratched and worn but still strong, just like the man himself. Lyra shifted slightly, her body aching, her muscles weak from the days of hunger and captivity. Darius glanced at her, his sharp eyes softening for just a second. "You should eat," he said simply, handing her another ration bar. She stared at it, her pride warring with her hunger again. Part of her wanted to throw it away to show she was not dependent on him. But another part, the part that still remembered the taste of food after so long without it, reached out and accepted it quietly. She ate in silence, her eyes always flicking toward him, studying his movements. Darius didn't speak much, but his presence filled the air around them. He was steady, grounded, and strangely calm. Lyra couldn't understand it. Humans she had met before were either greedy traitors or cruel soldiers. But this man was different. He acted as if helping her was natural, even though she was nothing to him. When they started walking again, Lyra's legs trembled with each step. Darius didn't complain when she slowed him down. He matched her pace, guiding her gently across the rocky ground. Every so often, when she stumbled, he caught her arm, steadying her without a word. It was such a simple thing, but each time it felt like a crack in the walls she had built around her heart. As the day wore on, they reached the remains of an old outpost. The place was abandoned, filled with broken walls and shattered machines. Darius decided they would rest there for a while, safe from the open wasteland. He cleared a spot in one of the ruined rooms, setting down his gear with practiced ease. Lyra sat in a corner, hugging her knees, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting danger at any moment. "Do you trust this place?" she asked suddenly. Darius looked around before answering. "No, but it's safer than being outside in the open." His honesty startled her. Most men would lie, try to make her feel better with false words. But he spoke the truth even if it wasn't comforting. She realized then that this man didn't care about appearances or lies. He was exactly what he seemed to be, and that made her uneasy, because she wasn't used to honesty. That night the ruins were cold, the wind howling through the broken windows. Darius lit a small fire, the light flickering across his armor. Lyra sat across from him, her silver hair glowing faintly in the firelight. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, she whispered, "Why didn't you leave me there, in the cage?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. His voice was calm, but there was something deeper behind his words. "Because I know what it feels like. To be left behind, to be nothing more than a number. I couldn't do that to you." Her breath caught. For the first time, she felt the weight of his words. This man carried his own scars, invisible ones. She wanted to ask more, but she didn't dare. Instead, she wrapped the cloak tighter around herself, fighting the strange ache in her chest. The next few days passed in a fragile rhythm. They traveled together, rested together, and shared food in silence. Slowly, Lyra began to regain her strength. Her steps grew steadier, her eyes sharper. But even as her body recovered, her mind was filled with questions. She couldn't understand why this man, this stranger, treated her differently from everyone else. One evening, as they camped near a stream, she finally asked the question that had burned inside her since the beginning. "What do you want from me?" Darius was crouched near the water, washing the dirt from his hands. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Nothing." She narrowed her eyes. "No one wants nothing. There is always a price." He shook his head slowly. "Not this time." Her frustration boiled over. She stood, her voice rising with anger she had buried for years. "Then why? Why me? Do you think I'm weak? Do you pity me? Am I just another burden you carry because it makes you feel noble?" Darius rose to his feet, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the campfire. His voice was firm, steady, but not cruel. "You are not a burden. You are not weak. You are someone who deserved better. That's all." Lyra froze, her chest heaving with the force of her emotions. His words struck her harder than any blade ever could. No one had ever said she deserved better. No one had ever even considered it. Her eyes burned with tears, but she quickly turned away, not wanting him to see. That night, as she lay awake, she replayed his words over and over in her mind. For so long, she had been abandoned, forgotten, treated like nothing. But this man, this human warrior, saw her differently. She didn't know why, and it scared her more than anything. Because if he was telling the truth, then maybe, just maybe, she could believe in something again. The following day brought danger. As they moved through a canyon, shadows flickered on the rocks above. Lyra's sharp senses picked it up first. "We're being watched," she whispered. Darius didn't hesitate. His hand went to his weapon, his body tensing like a predator ready to strike. Moments later, figures emerged from the cliffs, raiders armed and hungry, their eyes gleaming with greed. "Hand her over," one of them shouted. "We'll let you live if you do." Lyra's blood turned cold. She had seen this before too many times. Humans, aliens, it didn't matter. They all wanted the same thing. She braced herself, expecting Darius to let go of her, to abandon her like everyone else had. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself between her and the raiders, his weapon raised. His voice was like steel when he spoke. "You'll have to go through me." Lyra's heart stopped. For the first time, someone had chosen her over their own safety. Someone had stood in front of her, ready to fight for her. The raiders laughed at first, mocking him, but their laughter quickly turned into screams as Darius unleashed his fury. The battle was fierce. Gunfire echoed through the canyon, the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded filling the air. Lyra crouched low, watching in awe as Darius fought with skill and determination. He was outnumbered, but he did not falter. Every move was precise, every strike deadly. When it was over, the raiders lay scattered across the ground, silence returning to the canyon. Darius was wounded, blood running down his arm, but he stood tall, his eyes scanning the horizon for more threats. Only when he was sure it was safe did he finally lower his weapon. Lyra rushed to him, her hands trembling as she reached for his wound. "You're hurt," she whispered. He gave a faint smile, though his face was pale. "I've been worse." Something inside her broke then, not from pain, but from something else. Gratitude, sorrow, hope, all mixed together until tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She had thought she was empty, that nothing could touch her heart anymore. But this man had proved her wrong. That night, as she sat by the fire, she looked at him differently. He was no longer just the soldier who had freed her. He was something more. Someone she could believe in. Someone she could maybe trust. And for the first time in her life, Lyra whispered words she had never spoken before. "Thank you." Darius looked at her, surprised, but said nothing. He only nodded, his eyes soft in the firelight. For Lyra, it was enough. It was the beginning of something she never thought possible. The beginning of healing. The beginning of not being alone. The path out of the market was narrow and filled with shadows. Darius walked with slow, careful steps, his arms steady around Lyra to keep her from falling. She was weak, her legs trembling, her body still recovering from being locked in a cage for so long. The noise of the market faded behind them. Shouts, laughter, bargains, insults, all of it disappearing as they moved farther into the quiet streets. Lyra kept her head down, her silver hair falling forward to hide her face. She could feel the stares of people they passed. Some looked at her with pity, others with disgust, but most simply ignored her as if she were invisible. That was nothing new. She had felt invisible for a long time. What was strange was the man beside her, the human soldier who had paid for her freedom. She did not understand why he had done it. No one ever did something for her without expecting something in return. Her heart was heavy with doubt. Each time she stumbled and felt his arm tighten to support her, she wondered, what did he want from her? Was this kindness real, or was it another trick? She had been betrayed too many times to believe easily. Darius, however, did not say much. He just guided her carefully through the maze of rusted walls and broken stone, his eyes scanning the shadows for danger. His armor was heavy, his weapon still slung over his shoulder, and his presence felt strong, like a wall she could lean on. When she coughed softly, he stopped at once and lowered her to sit against a wall. "Rest for a moment," he said gently. She looked up at him with narrowed eyes. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had not spoken for days. "Why do you care?" Darius met her gaze without flinching. "Because no one else did." The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her. She looked away quickly, hugging her knees close to her chest. No one had ever given her such an answer. Usually people said they wanted payment, loyalty, or service. But this man had said none of that, just because no one else did. He knelt down and reached into a pouch on his belt. From it, he pulled a small water flask and held it out to her. "Drink." She stared at the flask, suspicion clear in her eyes. Her people had taught her long ago never to trust a gift without knowing the price. Slowly, she took it with trembling fingers and sniffed it first. It was clean water, nothing more. She drank in small gulps, and the liquid felt like life flowing back into her dry throat. For a moment, she closed her eyes, almost forgetting the pain. Darius watched her quietly, giving her space. He had seen many prisoners in his life, soldiers broken by war, civilians crushed by fear. He knew the signs. Lyra had been more than just abandoned. She had been hurt inside and out. And yet he also saw something unbroken in her, something waiting to rise again. That was why he had chosen her. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. When she finished the water, she pushed the flask back into his hand, her eyes still cautious. "What will you do with me now?" she asked. He shook his head. "Do with you? Nothing. You're free." The words stunned her. She blinked, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Free? That was not possible. Freedom was a dream, a lie told to children. Even when she had lived among her own people, she had never been free. There were always chains, chains of duty, chains of betrayal. To hear the words spoken so casually left her trembling. She laughed bitterly, though it came out broken and weak. "There is no such thing as free." Darius's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Then stay with me until you believe it." She froze. Stay with him? She wanted to argue, to refuse, but the truth was she had nowhere else to go. If she left him now, she would collapse in the dust and be dragged back by slavers. She hated her weakness, hated needing anyone, but for now she had no choice. So she nodded slowly. They moved on, leaving the market far behind. The path grew quieter, leading into rocky wastelands under a darkening sky. The wind carried dust across the ground, and the ruins of old machines lay half buried in the sand. Lyra walked with small, careful steps, leaning on him when her legs gave out. She hated how much she needed his help, but she also could not deny that his presence kept her alive. Night fell, and Darius set up a small camp. He built a fire with practiced ease, his movements quick and silent. Lyra sat on a rock nearby, her arms wrapped around herself. The fire's warmth touched her skin, and she realized how cold she had been for so long. Darius handed her a piece of dry rations. "Eat," he said. She hesitated, staring at the strange food. Her pride screamed at her not to take it, not to appear weak. But her body betrayed her, her stomach twisting with hunger. She took it and ate in small bites, never letting her eyes leave him, as if she expected him to laugh at her desperation. But he didn't. He simply sat on the other side of the fire, cleaning his weapon and keeping watch. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of flames. At last Lyra spoke. "Why are you here?" He looked up. "Here? In this place. You're not one of them." Her voice was sharp, almost accusing. "You're not like the slavers. You don't belong here." He sighed and leaned back slightly. "War brought me here. Orders, battles, all the same as always. I've fought for causes I barely understood, spilled blood for people who never cared. Maybe I don't belong anywhere." She studied him for a long moment. For the first time, she saw not just the soldier's armor and the hard lines of his face, but the weight he carried in his voice. He was a man who had lost things too, a man who understood being abandoned in his own way. Something inside her shifted, a small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The night grew colder, and the wind howled across the wasteland. Lyra shivered despite the fire. Without a word, Darius removed his cloak and placed it around her shoulders. She stared at him, stunned again. No one had ever given her warmth without asking for something in return. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. His answer was simple, the same as before. "Because no one else did." Tears burned her eyes, but she turned her face away, refusing to let him see. She did not want to appear weak. And yet, deep inside, something she thought was gone began to flicker again. Hope. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars spread across the sky, Lyra lay awake, listening to the steady sound of Darius's breathing as he kept watch. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel completely alone. She did not trust him yet, not fully. But a seed had been planted, and it grew quietly in the silence of the night. Maybe, just maybe, this human warrior was different. Maybe he truly would not abandon her, and though she would not admit it even to herself, the thought made her heart ache in a way she had almost forgotten. The market was alive with noise, full of shouts, bargaining, and the sharp smell of rusted metal mixed with alien spices. Lights flickered above broken stalls, and people of many species moved through the narrow paths. But in the middle of all that chaos, there was a cage. Inside the cage sat a girl, her body pressed against the cold iron bars. Her skin was a strange shade of purple, glowing faintly under the dull lights, and her silver hair fell down like a river of moonlight. She was silent, her eyes fixed on the ground, but her silence was louder than all the voices around her. This girl was not just anyone. Her name was Lyra, though no one in the market cared to ask. To the slavers who dragged her there, she was nothing more than a product to be sold. They laughed loudly, showing her off as if she were some exotic animal, pointing out her strange ears and her bright eyes. "Rare," one of them said. "You'll never find another like her." But when buyers came close, they only frowned. "Too thin," one muttered. "Too weak," said another. A few even laughed and walked away. To them, she was not worth their money. Every insult sank into Lyra's chest like a blade. She had once been proud, but now she was empty, hollowed out by betrayal. Her people had turned their backs on her, cast her out like she was worthless. Even here, surrounded by strangers, she felt the same rejection, the same cruel eyes judging her. Her hands gripped the bars tightly, her nails digging into her own palms, but she stayed silent. She had no strength left to fight, no hope left to hold. The crowd moved on, busy with other trades, weapons, stolen machines, alien spices. No one stopped for her. No one asked who she was or why she was there. She was invisible, forgotten. Everyone abandoned her. Everyone except one man. At the edge of the market, a human stood watching. His name was Darius. He was not like the merchants or the raiders who filled the place. He wore heavy armor, marked with scratches from old battles, and his face carried the weight of many wars. In his hands he held a rifle, but in his eyes there was something different. He was a soldier, yes, but his gaze was not hard like the others. It was careful, thoughtful, and strangely gentle for a man who had seen so much bloodshed. Darius did not move at first. He just watched the girl in the cage. He noticed the way she held herself, quiet and proud even in her pain. He noticed her eyes, full of fire that had not yet gone out. No matter how much the world tried to crush it, she was more than what the slavers called her. She was not trash. She was not weak. She was someone who had been broken, but still alive, and something inside him refused to walk away. The slaver closest to her saw Darius watching. He grinned, his teeth yellow and broken. "Interested?" he asked, tapping the cage with the butt of his knife. The sound made Lyra flinch, but she quickly looked away again as if refusing to show fear. "Rare stock, this one. I'll give you a good price." Darius stepped closer, his boots heavy against the ground. "What's her story?" he asked. "Story?" The slaver laughed. "Who cares about that? She's a runaway, a cast-off. Doesn't matter where she came from. She's mine now, and I'll sell her to whoever pays the most." Darius looked at the girl again. She did not raise her head, but he could see the way her shoulders tightened when the slaver spoke. She hated those words, hated being called worthless. He could see it in the way her fists clenched. She still had pride. She still had fight left in her, even if she tried to hide it. "How much?" Darius asked. The slaver's grin widened. He named a price far higher than what she was truly worth, thinking the human would laugh and walk away like all the others. But instead, Darius began removing things from his belt. A pouch of credits, a small dagger with a steel handle, even the extra ammo he carried. Piece by piece, he placed them on the table until the slaver's grin faltered. "You're serious," the man muttered, his eyes widening. "You'd give all that? For her?" The crowd nearby began to laugh. "Look at him," one alien sneered. "Spending his fortune on a slave no one wants." Another shook his head. "Foolish human. She'll slow him down. She's nothing but dead weight." But Darius ignored them. His eyes stayed on Lyra. He remembered the look in her eyes, the quiet strength buried under her pain. She was not dead weight. She was not nothing. She was someone worth saving. The slaver finally shrugged and took the payment. "She's yours," he said, unlocking the cage with a rusty key. The door creaked open. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, Lyra felt fresh air against her skin. But she did not move. She stayed where she was, her body tense, her eyes full of suspicion. Darius did not rush her. He stepped inside the cage, kneeling down so his eyes were level with hers. Up close, he could see her injuries more clearly. Cuts across her arms, bruises on her legs, and a deep weariness in her face. He held out his hand, not touching her, just offering. "You're free now," he said softly. "No one will hurt you anymore. Not while I'm here." Lyra's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a wound that had not healed. She had been lied to before, betrayed by people who promised safety. And yet something in his voice was different. It was steady, strong, and filled with a warmth she had not felt in so long. Slowly her hand lifted. Her fingers shook as she reached for his, finally letting him pull her to her feet. The crowd jeered, mocking the sight. But Darius did not care. He placed his arm around her, steadying her as she stumbled, her legs weak from being caged so long. She leaned against him, not because she wanted to, but because she had no strength left. Still, in that moment, she allowed herself to be guided. For the first time in forever, she was not alone. They walked through the market together, ignoring the laughter and whispers behind them. To everyone else, she was worthless. To everyone else, she was abandoned. But to Darius, she was someone worth fighting for. And though Lyra did not yet know it, this single act of kindness would change both of their lives forever.